prints. You know, a lot of these movies, the movie we showed last night, The Last Dawn, is a 100 years old. And we got it from Hungary. So kudos to Warner Brothers, because I believe the print that we're about to see of Dr. X is the only 35 millimeter print that's in its original 2-strip Technicolor format, along with Mystery of the Wax Museum. So a little departure from form. What I'm going to do is talk briefly about Dr. X and Wax Museum. We're going to enjoy those two films, and then I'll be back and talk about the Kennel murder case. Even though the running times on these films are short, it is going to be a long night. Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum, and by the way, Mike would be proud of this turnout tonight. I mean, he would love this.
He's here.
I wrote in the foreword someplace, or the prologue, that even though Curtiz has been dead for, 55 years, he's the anecdotal gift that keeps on giving. I mean, the Curtiz stories, I'm up here before I go down, and John Landis has me in a corner telling me a story about Curtiz that President Reagan told him. It's just incredible. So he would be proud of this. But of these two films, our first two films are in 2-strip Process 3 Technicolor, and without getting too technical about this was essentially a red and green system of color that dated back to 1916, that was approved over the years, and it involved photographing 2 consecutive frames of a black and white film between red and green filters. And Warner Brothers was in the vanguard of using 2-strip Process 3 Technicolor until the Depression and the cost bit into its bottom line a little too deeply. And I think a little bit about the Depression to put these films into context. Warner Brothers lost $8 million in 1931. RKO and Paramount would file for bankruptcy protection. And the studios were desperate. Their theater chains, they were closing theaters. They had dish nights to try and get people, giveaways to get people to buy theater tickets. And at that time, Darryl F. Zanuck wanted to find something, anything, to get people into movie theaters. And what he hit upon was horror, because horror sold tickets. Frankenstein and Dracula were produced and released by Universal in 1931, Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde with Frederick March. So Dr. X was premiered, I believe, in August of 1932. It was based on a play called The Terror, and was adapted by 2 Warner screenwriters, Earl Baldwin and Robert Tasker, who learned his trade while serving a stretch for robbery in San Quentin prison. In fact, I believe Philippe Garnier wrote an article, my friend and colleagues here tonight, about Tasker, called "They Made Me a Screenwriter." Originally, Bela Lugosi and Loretta Young were contemplated for the leading roles, but Zanuck signed the great Fay Wray, who was in pre-production for King Kong at RKO with Marion Cooper, and the Broadway actor Lionel Atwill. So Dr. X historically contains Fay Wray's first scream and the first opportunity for Lionel Atwill to skulk around a laboratory on a Hollywood soundstage that he did very, very often throughout his career. The cast includes a young Preston Foster, John Ray, a very strange-looking actor named Arthur Edmund Carew, who's also in Wax Museum. I found it interesting on how Warner Brothers produced this film, which basically was about a serial killer, gruesomeness, dismemberment, and Warner was kind of leery that all of this would turn off some of the exhibitors. So he publicized it as a comedy mystery, as a surprise ending. It's really weird, and of course, to kind of balance out the horror aspect, of course, because it was a Warner film made in the 1930s, you had to have a smart-ass reporter snapping off brisk dialogue. So Lee Tracy, who invented that character virtually, he shows up in Dr. X. The art direction by Anton Grott is wonderful. Jack Warner had 2 sets of cameras grinding away. There's a black and white version, and then there's a 2-strip Technicolor version that we're going to see. And of course, Warner, this led to acrimony with the founder of Technicolor. Warner had this big contract for X amount of Technicolor films, and then when the Depression hit, he tried to get out of it, and so there was a big wrangle on that. The shooting schedule on these films was like 24 days. And with this Technicolor came the hell of arc lights. and so forth. And Curtiz his style was to keep changing things, moving the camera, laying out dolly tracks, picking them up, and so he ran over schedule. And Fay Wray said that working for Curtiz, it made it feel like there was a camera behind those cool blue eyes. And he recalled how he treated some of the extras where he had a scene and some extra didn't do right and what he wanted, and he said, move to your right, you're right, more. Good, you're out of the frame now, go home. There's one scene in Dr. X that was filmed down at Laguna Beach, and when they had the lunch break, Curtiz was pacing up and down in the sand going, why do we have to break for lunch? I don't have to eat, I take an aspirin. Why do we have to waste this time? In fact, a lot of the pressure that Curtiz would vent and take out on people came from Jack Warner. In 27 years at the studio, I could summarize Jack Warner's guidance to Michael Curtiz in 2 words, and that is hurry up. So he was under pressure all the time and took it out. Mystery of the Wax Museum, that was released in February 1933, was the last film made with this 2-color Technicolor process. Fay Wray and Lionel Atwill return. In this one, Fay bears an unfortunate resemblance to Marie Antoinette, and Atwill has a much meatier role as Mr. Igor, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions from that. The real star is fast-talking Glenda Farrell, who plays really a female version of Lee Tracy as a sharp-talking, nosy reporter in the Warner tradition. In fact, UCLA archivist Scott McQueen, who is with us here tonight, Scott actually interviewed Farrell when he was 13 years old. Scott, was that like 2 weeks ago or no? But Farrell said that she remembered Curtiz actually working them 24 hours a day until they all collapsed and they had to send them home. Now remember, this was before the Screen Actors Guild. So, in fact, Curtiz, I think, in a perverse way, was responsible for the founding of the Screen Actors Guild. But really, ethereal production design by Anton Grott, beautiful camera work by Curtiz. The arc lights were so hot. There's one scene where there's a bunch of wax figures that you'll see, and the lights were so hot that the wax figures started melting, and Curtiz said, get rid of them, let's get extras in costumes, they'll be the wax figures and I'll shoot around them. So you'll see some of these wax figures, if you look closely, you might see one of them blink because they're not wax, they're people. In the end, Fay Wray ended up preferring the tender mercies of being toted around by King Kong rather than Curtiz's direction. Wow. I think she respected his ability, but she said he really wasn't a nice person. When I grew up, as a horror kid, reading Famous Monsters of Filmland and Castle of Frankenstein magazine. Yeah, let's hear it for the monster kids. The Mystery of the Wax Museum was like the missing Holy Grail, you know, and there's a finale that's compared to Lon Chaney's 1925 version of Phantom of the Opera. So this film was thought to be lost for years until a print was found in Jack Warner's personal collection, which is kind of the birthright of the print we're seeing today. It was remade as House of Wax, that many of you seen in 1953 by Warner Brothers. That was their first 3D film, and that was while Curtiz was still in the studio. They used another fine Hungarian director, the great André de Toth, to direct that. And of course, the wags in Hollywood said only Jack Warner would assign a one-eyed director like de Toth to helm a 3D film. Andre was another great Hungarian. The late Paul Picerni, who I knew, who was in that movie, had a wonderful story about they had a guillotine there, a real one from France. And wow. De Toth says, just stick your head in the guillotine. I'll have a guy on the top smoking a cigarette holding the blame, and then stick your head out and he'll drop the blade down. And Paul said, no, I'm not going to do that. But at any rate, different film, different story. But once again, thanks to Warner Brothers and UCLA for allowing me to program these films. And I'll be back to talk about the Kennel murder case. But now, let's all enjoy this rare pre-code, double-bill, 2-strip Technicolor of Michael Curtiz horror films with Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum. And thanks for coming.